Okay, so this is going to be another video about Syria. Um, I'm going to block comments on this video, and as I explained previously, the reason I'm doing that is because I cannot be bothered to put up with Putin zealots. That is to say, people who aren't interested in debate but simply insulting me on a personal level. I don't have to put up with your crap, and I'm not going to make my channel a platform for people who aren't interested in the truth but only interested in networks like Russia Today, which really validate their own incredibly biased opinions. There's a number of things I want to talk about. Mostly in this video, I'm going to be focusing on Assad, um, but there's a number of other areas I want to look at. Firstly, is a sort of whataboutery attitude that comes from the sort of zealots I'm talking about. Their thinking is that if you criticize Assad or Russia, that somehow equates to being pro-Islamist. I despise Islamism, and there doesn't need to be any introduction to the savagery of ISIS and the Al-Nusra Front. I hope ISIS in particular is wiped out this year. Um, and I'm not going to lose sleep over Russia killing ISIS fighters. ISIS are the scum of the earth, and they're a threat to every country. So that is not the issue here. And it is frankly pathetic that the only approach that these people can come up with is to say, oh, you're criticizing Assad or Putin, you must support ISIS. Pathetic and nonsensical. It's just that's a dead-ended argument that has no basis in reality, because I think it is perfectly compatible to see that there's brutality on both sides of this conflict. But one of the most perverse distortions about Syria, and I think it's a tragedy, it's infuriating, but it is also a tragedy, is the exoneration of the Assad regime. It does look like the regime is probably winning this war. Now, there's an old saying, the winners write history. And that is what's probably going to happen with this because of the savagery of the likes of ISIS. The world is focusing on that. And in the last 5, 6 years, the world has lost sight of the brutality of the Assad regime. A regime which, by the way, started this war. It started this war when back in 2010 there were legitimate protests against corruption, against unemployment, against human rights abuses. And Syrians had the same concerns at that time as Egyptians did, as Bahrainis did, as people did across the Arab world. Now I defy anybody to tell me that was not the case. I defy you to tell me that all Syrians supported Assad in 2010. If that's your position, you're either ignorant or a liar. And as for this attack on myself that, oh, you're not a journalist, what do you know? I'm not a journalist. I don't claim to be. But I have spent a lot of time looking at numerous sources on this. And I am adamant that this narrative that RT zealots spin out is just so one-sided and so far from reality that it's just perverse, frankly. You'll notice I've actually changed my user profile picture to RT with a little cross through it. That's not going to be permanent, it's going to be temporary. The reason I done that is because my strength of feeling was such that I just wanted to kind of put something out there to show not just how I felt, just something that would be, because people do notice profile icons, and it's not usually the sort of thing I do actually. Usually I have a neutral world globe, and I will revert back to that at some point. But the amount of pro-Russian and pro-Assad propaganda that is out there is such that there needs to be some counter to that. And these people talk about the mainstream media, and what they're when they say that, what they mean is Western media. Now, in a sense, it's true because it's mainstream in the Western context. But the point is, Russian state media is mainstream in Russia. Okay? So I think this is a bit of a meaningless term, mainstream media. And it is a way that conspiracy theorists and pro Putin, pro Assad fanatics basically um, try to silence anyone else with a different point of view. You know, people have attacked me and others with views similar to mine. Oh, you only hear what you want to hear. You believe everything Western media tells you, etc., etc. But this is astonishing hypocrisy because they slavishly believe everything Russia Today tells them. I mean, you just have to look at RT videos and see the sort of people that are going on to them. And usually they're people who are motivated by hatred of the American government. Now, that in itself isn't, I have no issue with that. What I do take issue with is the fact that they hate the American government and they're using Russian state media as some sort of beacon of truth. Um, and it is a disgrace that you have the likes of Eva Bartlett. A lot of people have defended her. That was what that last thing was about, because they resented the fact that I was challenging her position. Look, I stand by that. If you are a journalist and you choose to so vociferously take one side of a conflict over the other, you're not independent. You're just not. Okay? So even if some of her claims are true, nobody can rationally say that she is independent when she is so forcefully defending the Assad regime. If you agree with her, fine. Just don't tell me that she is independent. She's not. She's not. And only a complete idiot would try and argue that she is. And it isn't just her, there's others. Um, and frankly, I just think it's disgraceful. I'm not going to get into the whole business of statistics because that can go back and forth all day. But like I say, one of the greatest tragedies of this war, in my opinion, is the exoneration of the Assad regime, because people have been led to believe that this is a regime that is completely innocent and they're just fighting against terrorists, as if ISIS and so on just chose Syria. You know, this is a vicious death cult, and they've targeted many countries. But according to the sort of people who I'm talking about, they think that, oh, ISIS just decided to go into Syria. Let's just wreck Syria, and just for the sake of it, as if this war began with ISIS. Now, ISIS are thugs, no question about it, but they took advantage of a situation that was started by Bashar Assad when he decided to brutally crush legitimate protests. And then what happened? 2012, Russia and China decided to veto condemnation of Assad's excesses. It wasn't even about removing Assad, it was about condemnation of Assad's excesses and his brutal use of force against civilians. Now, if you look at independent monitoring groups, and I use the word independent here carefully because when it comes to Syria, I concede that it is genuinely hard to know. But given the information that is available, I would say they're about as independent as it's possible to be. Okay? I'm not sure if anyone is 100% independent when it comes to Syria. But these groups, firstly, the likes of RT smear them as being aligned with Islamists. I think that's a very serious allegation and one that has they produce little evidence to that effect. But groups like the Syria Observatory for Human Rights and other monitoring groups um, have catalogued casualties of this war. Now, I would make this point: if they are pro Islamist, they would hardly be using the term Islamic extremists in their database. Because a pro Islamist organization is going to be pandering the whole Islamophobia line. So they're hardly likely to be saying Islamic extremists, are they? Think about that for a second. Anyway, they have chronicled thousands upon thousands of civilians who have died at the hands of the Assad regime. In several months of Russian bombing, it's estimated 2,000 civilians were killed. 2,000 people. Now, if that had been American warplanes or British warplanes, I guarantee you there would be massive protests in Washington or London. So Russia gets a free pass. Why? Why? And, the purpose of this video, I'm not trying to convince Assad, Putin, extremists, fanatics. No, why do I call them that? I call them that because they have tunnel vision. They're not interested in even trying to be neutral. Okay, I'll backtrack. I won't say extremists because these individual people being ignorant isn't. I should. I do backtrack on that. Not extremists, but they are zealots. The only reason I'm backtracking is because individually, they're probably not violent people. But I do think they're ignorant, and I think that they have a very smug sense of intelligence, like we know everything. And when they attack me, they assume that I'm just watching Western media. I haven't even quoted any Western media outlet when I've made these videos. It's not like I'm making videos and saying, "Oh, CNN says this, CNN says that, BBC says this, BBC says that." I've met Syrians. You asked about my experience in Syria. Well, I haven't been there, but I have known Syrians. Okay, Syrian nationals who hate Bashar Assad. They also hate Islamic State. So don't give me this crap that all Syrians support Assad. Clearly, you don't know how a dictatorship works. In a dictatorship, people support the dictator through fear. So when people say things like Assad, 95% of Assyrians support Assad, I have no doubt that in areas controlled by the government, it probably is something like that. Partly because of the extremism of the Islamist groups, but also because dictators rule for fear. The same thing happened in Gaddafi's Libya. There was always high approval ratings for Gaddafi. This is the nature of a dictatorship. Wake up, you sheep. That is how dictatorships work. That's how they work. They rule through fear. And the fact is, the Assad regime, I think one reason it gets a pass is because it's not Islamist, it's not a theocratic regime. And so, because Islamism is one of the biggest problems facing the world, and that's something most people would agree with, because Assad was largely secular, a bit like Saddam, he gets a free pass. Also, he's a smart guy. He knows how to do interviews. He knows how to speak in a diplomatic way and so on. So he looks like just an embattled president fighting terrorists. And that just totally exonerates the thousands of Syrians who have been tortured and killed at his hands. And I think it is disgusting, quite frankly, that foreign state media, Russia Today, is actually going out of its way to prop up a dictator in Syria. Now, when you connect the dots here, it's not that hard to see why. Russia is clearly getting a foothold in Syria. Okay, this is probably a way of kind of recuperating from their embarrassment in Afghanistan 38 years ago. Putin is a hardline neo nationalist, so he is determined to kind of reclaim the glory of the Soviet Union and kind of reimburse from the embarrassment of that era. So it figures that Putin wants to get a foothold in the Middle East. What better way to do that than by propping up a dictator and then trying to make himself look like the good guy? Oh, Tsar Putin is the savior of Syria. Give me a break. I just think it's a perverse joke. If you really look at the opinion of Syrians who have been living in rebel held areas, ask them what they think of Russia. Ask them what they think of Assad. These are not terrorist sympathizers. These people are not bad people. That's another thing. I think it's disgusting that Russia Today promotes the Assad propaganda that any Syrian who doesn't support Assad is a terrorist. Russia Today and its apologists are directly insulting victims of a brutal dictator. Are you really telling me that every Syrian who doesn't support Assad is by extension a terrorist? It's almost cartoonish. The sort of propaganda coming from the regime, we're fighting against the terrorists. And people who have vested interests in this, so I've noticed, for instance, Russian nationals, Chinese nationals as well, because obviously they don't like Western criticism of Chinese authoritarianism, so of course they're going to defend a dictator. Um, in the end of the day, the only thing that matters is the truth. Forget all the media networks, okay? Let's forget all of them for a second. Forget Russia Today, forget the BBC, forget all of them. The only thing that matters is the pure, God honest truth. And if there is a God, God knows. God knows. Because the point I'm making with these videos is not to defend the rebels. There are thugs among the rebels. There are Islamist factions among the rebels. Probably a lot more so now than a few years ago. I've never disputed that. But anyone who tries to honestly claim that Assad is innocent, that Assad's forces haven't killed civilians, they are either deliberately lying or they are thoroughly ignorant. And when I look at comments on Russia Today, it's made up of Russian nationalists, Assad loyalists, and useful idiots from the West. That tends to be the sort of market of Russia Today. Russian nationalists, Assad loyalists within Syria, and useful idiots in the West who usually they're well to the left, sometimes well to the right as well. That's the interesting thing, because right wing populists also seem to have a strange affection for Russia Today, and it's just wrong. It is just wrong how this lie is being spun, that Assad is just a good guy defending his country, and these people have no shame. I can forgive ignorance, but what is unforgivable is deliberately promoting falsehoods. And that's why I think Eva Bartlett is a very controversial figure. Because, firstly, let's just forget this idea that she's independent. You can say you agree with her, okay? You can say she's brave, you agree with her, all the rest of it. Do not tell me that a journalist who openly supports a dictator is independent. If this was the 1930s, she would be like those very naive Westerners who went to Germany, or I shouldn't say Westerners in that context, but very naive people who went to Germany and said, Herr Hitler is a good man. That's Eva Bartlett. And I just think it's a disgrace. So I spoke a bit longer than I intended here. I'll round it up. But call me what you will, okay? Call me a Western imperialist, call me a stooge of whatever, whatever. I'm beyond caring. I'm only making these videos because there has to be a counter view to the level of sheepishness that is out there. People not willing to think for themselves. People who just blindly believe everything Russia Today tells them. Okay? Because when I'm talking, I'm not talking via CNN or the BBC or anything like that. I'm looking at independent sources, or at least sources that could be as independent as they can possibly be. I don't believe it is possible to be 100% independent when it comes to Syria. But frankly, when a dictator has killed thousands of people, you can hardly blame those Syrian sources for being critical of the regime. And they'll leave it there.